Anton couldn't remember the last time his heart raced as fast as it did that afternoon. He had been hunched over his laptop, fingers hovering above the keyboard, wrestling with a report that refused to come together, when he heard the polite knock at his apartment door. The courier's bouquet of bells was a mild interruption, until Anton realized the envelope in the man's hand wasn't a bill or a form letter, but something far more personal. He took the heavy, cream-colored card from the courier without looking at its face, nodding curtly. As the door clicked shut behind him, Anton turned the invitation over in his hands, the embossed gold lettering glowing faintly in the shaft of late afternoon sun. His name, Anton Morozov, appeared in elegant script at the top, followed by the words he had never expected to see again. You are cordially invited to celebrate the wedding of Sergei Ivanov and Natalia Belova. 5 years ago, Anton and Sergei had been inseparable. Two boys from the same neighborhood, who dreamed of starting a band together, of traveling the world and chasing sunsets. They had shared everything. First heartbreaks, rain-soaked football matches, the burnt flavor of instant coffee during all-night study sessions. But then the argument had come, sharp and brutal, sparked by a misunderstanding over borrowed money and a betrayal Anton hadn't fully grasped until it was too late. Harsh words were exchanged, apologies went unsaid, and suddenly the phone calls stopped. Anton had tried to reach out. Sergei had never answered. Now here was an invitation asking him to witness his old friend's happiest day. The irony was as bitter as over-steeped tea. He felt a hollow ache in his chest, a memory of laughter and shared secrets and a friendship so fundamental he had assumed it would last forever. But they had let resentment grow in the silence that followed their fight, and neither had been brave enough to bridge the gap. Anton stood in his small kitchen, the envelope unopened on the counter, and replayed the old quarrel in his mind. He recalled Sergei's pleading eyes when Anton demanded the money back, the way their friendship had crumpled under the weight of words neither meant to cut so deeply. He thought of the nights he spent staring at his ceiling, wondering if he should write, call, beg forgiveness, or if he had simply been too proud. He opened the invitation at last, sliding out a card thick with nostalgia. The date was 2 months away, giving him time to decide. He read Natalia's name, a woman he had never met, imagined her in white lace beneath the chapel's wooden beams. He pictured Sergei's smile as he saw those vows etched onto paper. A twinge of envy, no regret, pulled at him. But regret alone did not make him brave. With a slow breath, Anton picked up his phone and tapped out a short, impersonal RSVP. Thank you for the invitation. I'm sorry that I cannot attend. Wishing you both all the best. His thumb hovered over send for a moment, long enough for a pang of guilt to flash through him, but then he pressed it decisively. As he watched the message drift into the ether, he felt a weight settle onto his shoulders, as though each word were a brick sealing him away from the past. He folded the invitation and slipped it into the drawer beneath his desk, closing it with a quiet click. There it would lie, hidden among prepaid bills and old receipts. A silent confession of a friendship discarded. Later that evening, Anton wandered the empty streets near his apartment, the glow of streetlights casting long shadows. He watched young couples holding hands, heard the flicker of laughter from an outdoor cafe. Each happy pair seemed to mock him, pressing him further into his loneliness. Back home, Anton tossed his keys onto a side table and poured himself a glass of vodka, taking a long swallow in a vain attempt to numb the ache. The invitation's fate felt sealed. He had chosen convenience and safety over the discomfort of reconciliation. Yet even as he raised the glass to his lips, he couldn't shake the unease that coiled in his gut. He had turned his back on Sergei once. He would do it again. And maybe this time, there would be no chance to mend what they had broken. Anton slipped out of the office just before 6, the sky over the city a bruised purple as dusk settled in. He left his desk in disarray, the half-finished spreadsheets and sticky notes fluttering like forgotten birds in the stale fluorescent light. Down in the lobby, he paused by the revolving doors, watching two young women in summer dresses laughing as they parted ways. He sensed their joy so acutely it felt like a punch to the gut. He turned away and stepped onto the sidewalk, the chilly wind tugging at his coat collar, and began to walk without a destination. His feet led him along streets he had known since childhood. He passed the old playground, where he and Sergei had raced one another, on the swings, shouting until their voices cracked. The swing set stood abandoned now, its paint peeling, though the chain links still sang metallic songs in the breeze. He ran a finger over the chipped surface of the slide's railing and felt an ache bloom in his chest. He remembered how Sergei's strong arms would lift him to the top, and how together they had imagined soaring higher than those rusty bars could ever allow. Anton wandered into a narrow alley that opened onto a small cafe emitting warm light. Through the window he saw couples perched on bar stools, sharing steaming mugs of coffee and whispering secrets into one another's ears. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass, watching the way their shoulders pressed close. He felt profoundly alone. A barista glanced his way, offered a polite nod, and Anton stepped back into the night, unable to bring himself to join their intimacy. Back on the street, he walked until the lamplight transitioned to darkness, and the facades of shops closed for the night like sleepy sentinels. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a colleague asking if he wanted to grab a drink, and he ignored it, sliding the device back into his coat. He thought of sending a message to Sergei, admitting how hollow his refusal felt, but the letters caught in his throat. Pride and fear conspired to silence him. Instead, he hailed a cab and went home. In his apartment, the walls felt closer than ever. He poured himself a glass of water and stared at the engraved invitation tucked beneath his coffee table. He lifted it reverently, turning it over, wishing he could call it back. When sleep finally came, it brought no relief. He dreamed of a wedding chapel, empty, but for him, the echoes of vows bouncing off marble walls. He woke in a cold sweat, the invitation's weight heavy under his pillow. Over the next days, Anton buried himself in routine. He sat through meetings, typed endless reports, and negotiated contracts with a practiced monotony. Yet each time he thought he had focused, his mind drifted to Sergei's smile on some distant afternoon, before all the fights and silences. He caught himself staring at his phone, thumb grazing the contacts list, before he remembered why he had erased Sergei's name. He tried distractions. A late-night run through the park, the steady rhythm of his feet on the gravel, a brief reprieve. A detour to the art museum where colors and shapes offered a softer kind of solace. Even a weekend fishing trip he took alone by. A quiet lake, but everything reminded him of what he had thrown away. The laughter of friends around campfires, the gentle brush of dawn air on his face, the way discs of sunlight filtered through trees. All of it echoed with the absence of his oldest friend. One evening, he returned home to discover the lights in his apartment flickering when he flipped the switch. He stood in the dark, the hum of the failing bulb a somber soundtrack to his solitude. He realized then that he had traded the chance to mend a broken friendship for a safe, unremarkable life of solitary routines. He sank onto his couch and closed his eyes, the silence pressing against him like a confession. The emptiness he felt was not just the absence of Sergei, but the hollow echo of every no he had spoken to the possibility of forgiveness. And in that deep, unending quiet, Anton understood that running from the past had only chased away the life he truly wanted. Late that evening, Anton was startled by the low thump of a package against his apartment door. He paused mid-scroll through social media, where congratulatory posts for Sergei's upcoming wedding still flickered with color and joy. The hallway light cast his shadow long and narrow across the worn linoleum. With a reluctant sigh, he rose from the couch, crossed the small foyer, and retrieved a plain unmarked box from the doormat. No return address, no courier slip. Just a brown cardboard cube taped shut, as though someone had dropped it without a second thought. He carried it inside and set it gently on the coffee table, far enough away to keep the surface pristine, but close enough that he could hear the faint creak of the tape as he peeled it open. The interior was lined with soft, bristly paper, like the inside of an old jewelry case. At its center lay a small wooden box, its surface polished smooth. but with corners worn by time. Along one edge, delicate letters had been engraved long ago. SI, the initials deep enough to catch the light and throw tiny shadows into the grooves. Beneath the wooden box, folded in yellowed tissue, Anton found a single photograph. He unfolded it with careful fingers. The image was decades old. Two boys, grinning ear to ear, arms slung around each other's shoulders. In the background, the sloping hillside of a summer camp, pine boughs swaying overhead. One face was unmistakably his own, eyes bright with mischief. The other belonged to Sergei, ruffled hair and a gap-toothed grin that had softened over the years, but was forever preserved in that moment. Anton's throat tightened as the memories flooded back. Sleeping in sagging canvas tents, starlit guitar riffs drifting into the night, whispered promises that they would always be friends. Under the photograph, he discovered a pair of antique cufflinks. Each was carved from mahogany and shaped like a small compass rose. When he moved them under the apartment light, the metal pins glinted silver. He remembered the gift. Late one Christmas, Sergei had presented them wrapped in newspaper. "For when you find your way home," he had said, voice warm with sincerity. But those cufflinks had vanished long ago, presumed lost when Anton moved into this tiny one-bedroom flat. How had they resurfaced now, and who had gone to such lengths to deliver them? Every muscle in Anton's body went taut. He glanced at the unopened wedding invitation, still stuffed in his desk drawer, its elegant curve of paper and gold, embossing almost mocking in the dim light. He closed his eyes and let the box and its contents sink in. The initials SI on the lid, the photograph of their boyhood selves, the cufflinks that once symbolized friendship and loyalty. His pulse quickened. Someone was reaching out to him, reminding him of a bond he had carelessly severed. Slowly, he lifted the wooden box into his lap. The grain warmed under his palms, and the hinge creaked softly as he pried it open. Inside lay a broken pocket watch, its face cracked and the hands frozen at exactly 7:17. A loose gear sat beside it, tarnished brass catching the light. He recalled the story from their last Christmas together. Sergei's father, a skilled watchmaker, had gifted that very watch to Anton as a token of trust and gratitude. "Never let time slip away from us," he had said. Anton remembered cradling the watch like a fragile promise. He never imagined that it too would slip into oblivion. The air in the apartment felt suddenly heavy, thick with the weight of unspoken words. Anton pressed his palm against his forehead and closed his eyes, trying to steady his racing heart. He could almost hear the echo of Sergei's laughter by the campfire, see the sparks rising toward the night sky. The mysterious package was more than a collection of heirlooms. It was a message, beautifully arranged and impossible to ignore. Someone, probably Sergei himself, was offering Anton a chance to reclaim what he had lost. He leaned forward and placed the pocket watch back into its carved recess, carefully restoring each piece to its place. Then, as if guided by some impulse he hadn't felt in years, Anton reached for his laptop and opened a blank document. He typed a single word in the center of the page. "I'm sorry." His fingers paused above the keyboard, trembling. All around him, the apartment was silent, but in that hush, he could almost hear Sergei's voice urging him on. Without another hesitation, Anton opened his email and composed a new message, this time directly to Sergei. He hesitated only long enough to choose the right words, then hit send. In the aftermath, the only sound was the soft click of the mouse and the steady hum of the refrigerator. Outside, the city carried on oblivious. Inside, Anton felt the first stirrings of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Anton woke the next morning with the wooden box resting on his coffee table like an unanswered question. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting the engraving into sharp relief. S.I. He poured himself a black coffee and carried the box to the kitchen table, its weight heavier now that he knew it carried more than mere wood and brass. With deliberate care, he ran his fingertips over the carved initials, letting the cool surface remind him of Christmas mornings long past. He closed his eyes and suddenly heard again the crackle of the fire in Sergei's childhood living room, the scent of cinnamon and pine, and the soft voice of Sergei's father, explaining how time, like friendship, was meant to be cherished. He lifted the wooden lid, its tiny hinge loosening with a soft creak. Inside lay the photograph, the pocket watch, and the mahogany cufflinks. Anton removed the photo first. The edges were worn and slightly curled. On the back, in faint ink, someone had scrawled a date. 06/12/2009. That was the winter camp where they first found their shared love for music. The week they'd written their first song under the stars. He held the image close, studying the expressions frozen in time. Two boys whose laughter was identical, whose dreams had once intertwined so completely they could not imagine drifting apart. He set the photograph aside and lifted the watch, turning it over in his palm. The cracked glass face and the stopped hands at 7:17 felt like a code begging to be deciphered. He searched the interior recesses of the box, but found no hidden compartments, no secret letter. The only clue remained the engraving, S.I. His mind flipped through every Sergei Ivanov he'd ever known, settling again and again on his childhood friend. Could Sergei have gone to all this trouble? His chest tightened. If so, this was no faceless stranger's prank. It was an invitation. Anton rummaged through a drawer in his desk for an old photograph album, the kind with velvety black pages. He found a Polaroid from their high school graduation. Sergei in a cap too big for his head, Anton in oversized robes, both clutching rolled diplomas and grinning like fools. He placed it side by side with the camp photo, searching for differences in paper grain, ink color, anything that might reveal a different sender. But the handwriting on the back of the camp photo matched the slanted script Sergei had used on every birthday card Anton still kept. A sudden impulse drove him to his laptop. He opened his email account and scrolled through old exchanges with Sergei. Short messages about exam results, long threads after midnight about songwriting riffs. None mentioned the watch or the cufflinks, but every single one was signed S. He clicked on their last conversation, the one that ended with Sergei's, "Let's talk soon." That email was stamped March the 12th, 2018, 2 weeks before the fight that shattered their friendship. There was no mention of any keepsake, but Anton read and reread those lines until familiarity turned into sorrow. By midday, he had traced every S in his memory back to Sergei. No one else in his life had wrapped gifts in wood and brass. No one else had dated pictures with such quiet nostalgia. Anton felt his breath catch as he realized the package was a personal plea, a gesture meant to spark a reunion. He closed the laptop and leaned back, the ache in his chest blossoming into resolve. Letting the past lie buried was no longer an option. He rose and fetched his phone. His thumb hovered over Sergei's contact name, but his heart pounded too fiercely to press call. Instead, he opened a new text message and began to type. "I received something yesterday. It has your initials." He paused, imagining Sergei reading those words. He tried again. "I need to know why you sent it." His finger trembled over the send button. After a long moment, he pressed it, each tap echoing with hope and fear. The screen flickered, and the message slipped into the digital void. Leaning against the counter, Anton stared at the box and its contents as if seeing them anew. The engraving was no longer a mere monogram. It was a lifeline extended across years of silence. He realized that unraveling the mystery had done more than awaken memories. It had opened a path back to a friendship he thought was gone forever. Now all that remained was to wait. Anton lay awake long after midnight, the soft hum of the city beyond his window doing nothing to soothe the turmoil in his chest. The wooden box and its contents lay on the coffee table before him, silent witnesses to a friendship he had thought irretrievably lost. He tossed and turned, imagining Sergei reading his message. The simple words on his phone. "I received something yesterday. It has your initials." And wondering whether they had sparked hope or merely curiosity. Every thump of his heart seemed to echo through the apartment. Unable to bear the stillness any longer, Anton slipped out of bed and padded across the creaky floorboards to his desk. He hesitated over the contact name saved in his phone. Sergei. He tapped it once, then twice, but when the call screen appeared, his courage faltered. He hung up before the first ring, guilt tightening his throat more fiercely than fear. He stared at the flickering screen until the batteries dimmed. He reached instead for a battered leather notebook, its pages filled with song lyrics and half-remembered dialogues. Opening to a blank page, he paused, pen hovering above paper. He began to write. The first memory that came to him, a laugh shared beside a crackling campfire. He described the way Sergei's voice had sounded as he strummed the guitar, how the sparks had danced in the night air. The words spilled out faster than he could steady them. The time they'd stayed up until dawn talking about the future. The day Anton had moved into his first small apartment, and Sergei carried his boxes up 3 flights of stairs without complaint. With each memory he wrote, the ache in his chest softened, replaced by warmth he had not felt in years. He scribbled until the ragged edges of the notebook were filled, recounting every moment of shared mischief and loyalty. His hand ached, but he refused to stop. When the page was at last full, he read back what he had written and realized these recollections were more than nostalgia. They were proof that the bond they once shared still existed in ink and memory. A new determination settled over him. He rose from his chair and stood in the pale glow of his desk lamp, considering how best to bridge the distance between them. A heartfelt letter, he decided, would carry more weight than a curt text. He needed paper worthy of his words. In his closet, he found an envelope of linen stationery, crisp ivory sheets he had purchased years ago for another occasion and never used. He gathered what he would need: the notebook, the broken pocket watch, the folded photograph from the box, and the leather-bound journal brimming with memories. By the time his kettle whistled, the first pale light of dawn was seeping through the curtains. He boiled water for tea and settled back at the kitchen table. The stationery spread before him like a blank promise. With careful strokes, he began to write. An apology for his silence, an acknowledgement of pride that had stood between them, and a plea for understanding. He described how the unexpected package had shaken him, how each artifact had reminded him of shared dreams and unspoken gratitude. He promised that, regardless of what came next, their history, for all its bruises, had shaped him in ways he would carry forever. When the ink ran dry, he folded the pages neatly and tucked them into the envelope. He placed the photograph on top, allowing the image of 2 carefree boys to greet Sergei first. Then he added the broken watch, held together by hope more than metal, and the cufflinks as a final token. He sealed the envelope with a faint crackle of wax, a small deliberate act meant to convey sincerity. As he pressed the seal, he felt the strange calm settle over him, the storm within at last finding its eye. Anton retrieved the stamped wedding invitation from his desk drawer and laid it beside the sealed envelope. He ran his finger along the gold embossing won him last time, before slipping both pieces into a slim messenger bag. His mind raced with questions. Would Sergei read everything? Would he understand the fear that had kept Anton silent for so long? Would this letter be enough to open the door that Anton had slammed shut years ago? He paused at the front door, messenger bag slung over his shoulder, and breathed in the cool morning air. The city was waking up. Distant car horns, the clatter of early footsteps, the faint ring of a shopkeeper's doorbell. Tomorrow he would go to the post office or the quiet street corner where Sergei's apartment block still stood. Tonight, though, he allowed himself a moment of quiet triumph. He had honored their past, confessed his mistakes, and forged a path toward reconciliation. His heart, once locked behind walls of regret, felt lighter than it had in years. Satisfied that he had done all he could for now, Anton closed his apartment door gently behind him. The letter remained secure in his bag, a tangible bridge between what had been and what could still be. As he walked down the hallway toward his bed, sleep finally found him, soft and tentative, carrying the promise of tomorrow's first step toward healing a friendship that had defined him. Anton found himself standing at the edge of the old willow grove in Riverside Park, the very spot where he and Sergei had once spent entire afternoons as boys, skimming stones and plotting grand adventures. The spring air was cool, carrying the faint perfume of blooming magnolias, and sunlight danced on the river's surface in shimmering ripples. Anton's heart thudded in his chest like a drum. Every footstep toward the carved wooden bench felt both familiar and impossibly new. He spotted Sergei before he heard his voice. Tall with the same easy posture, though time had sharpened his features and softened the edges of his once boyish grin. Sergei stood under a willow curtain, hands deep in the pockets of his worn leather jacket, as though bracing himself for whatever confession was about to follow. Anton's breath caught, and for a moment, the years of silence seemed to melt away. Anton! Sergei's voice was low, carrying both question and relief. Hey, Anton managed, voice catching. He reached into his satchel and withdrew the wooden box, then paused, swallowing hard. The box looked smaller in his hands than it had on the coffee table. Its initials, SI, gleamed in the dappled light. He set it gently on the weathered bench between them. Sergei took a cautious step forward. I didn't know if you'd come. I almost didn't, Anton admitted, running a hand through his hair. But I needed to do this in person. He unfolded the thick envelope and pulled out the stationery letter, its edges slightly softened from travel. I wrote everything down. I wanted you to hear it. Truly hear it. He handed Sergei the envelope. For a moment, Sergei simply held it, turning the paper between his fingers as though it were the most fragile thing in the world. Then he peeled back the seal and read. Anton watched the lines of tension around Sergei's mouth soften, saw his eyes wander over the scrawled paragraphs detailing Anton's regret, his pride that had stood in the way, and the lonely nights spent haunted by memories of their friendships. Collapse. When Sergei finally looked up, his eyes glistened. I kept every letter you ever sent me, he said quietly. And every time I looked at your handwriting, I wondered when you'd come back. He set the letter aside and lifted the wooden box's lid. Inside lay the photograph of two boys among pines, the mahogany cufflinks, and the broken pocket watch, frozen at 7:17. Sergei lifted each piece out carefully, as though he feared they might vanish. These were my dad's, Sergei said hoarsely, tracing the cracked watch face with a fingertip. He gave me that watch the day you moved away. When it stopped, I thought it was a sign I'd lost more than metal gears. He blinked back a sudden tear. But you brought it back. Anton swallowed the lump in his throat. I'm so sorry I let it slip away. I'm sorry I let us slip away. Sergei folded the photograph and handed it back. I've missed you, he said. I was angry, but more than that I was sad. Sad that we couldn't talk it out. They sat in silence for a long moment. Two friends reunited under the same willow where they had once carved their initials into the bark. Finally, Sergei closed the wooden box and offered his hand. Can we start over? Anton clasped it warmly. Yes, I never stopped wanting that. They rose together and walked down the winding path, sharing stories of the years they'd lost. Anton speaking of the empty evenings and unanswered invitations, Sergei admitting how hollow the wedding plans had felt without his oldest friend by his side. By the time they reached the park entrance, the early afternoon sun had climbed high, and laughter bubbled between them as naturally as it had in their youth. Before parting, Sergei slipped the box back into Anton's hands. Keep this, he said softly, as a reminder that time can heal if we let it. Anton nodded, voice thick with gratitude. And as a promise, I'll never let us drift apart again. They clasped each other in a tight embrace, the years of regret dissolving in the warmth of forgiveness. As Anton watched Sergei walk away toward town, he felt a lightness he had not known in years, an open path before him, lit by the rekindled bond of friendship that no package could ever carry alone. Morning light filtered through stained glass windows into the ancient stone chapel where the ceremony was about to begin. The gentle hush of guests settling into carved wooden pews created a soft symphony beneath the vaulted ceilings, each footstep and whispered greeting echoing like a prelude to a long-awaited reunion. Outside, spring blossoms framed the arches, their petals drifting in the breeze like confetti. Anton stood at the back of the aisle, his hands trembling around the envelope that held Sergei's heartfelt letter and the family keepsakes he had returned. His tailored suit felt impossibly snug, as though tightened by anticipation. He looked down at the invitation tucked into his breast pocket, the very same he had once declined, now a testament to courage rediscovered. As the organ began to play, its deep notes resonating through the chamber, Anton's heart pounded in time with the music. Through the doorway appeared Sergei, resplendent in a classic tuxedo, eyes scanning the room until they found Anton. For a moment, time seemed to pause. Two lifelong friends, separated by pride and misunderstanding, now united by forgiveness and hope. Sergei's smile, equal parts joy and relief, brightened the stained glass portraits above the altar. He gave a slight nod of acknowledgement before turning toward the bridal procession. Bride and groom, best friends once more, now stood side by side. Sergei's bride graceful in ivory lace, Sergei himself radiant under the midday sun that danced upon the polished stone. Anton took a tentative step forward, crossing the threshold into the aisle, and found his place among the front row of guests. As he settled into the polished pew, he watched Sergei reach toward the bride's hand. Their vows began, words spoken softly but carried through every heart in the room. Vows of love and loyalty, promises whispered beneath the canopy of history and healing. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, a burst of applause filled the chapel. Rose petals rained down from the balcony above as Sergei squeezed Anton's shoulder in gratitude. In that moment, Anton understood that this day was more than a celebration of marriage. It was a celebration of friendship reborn. Later, in the sunlit courtyard outside, tables dressed in white linen and pastel florals welcomed guests for the reception. Laughter and conversation swelled like music as Anton and Sergei joined the gathering. Sergei raised a glass and tapped it gently with a silver spoon. A hush fell. To new beginnings, Sergei declared, his gaze unwavering. To friendships that weather storms, to forgiveness that heals, and to the stories we write together from this day forward. Anton held his glass high, catching Sergei's eye. To you and Natalia, he replied, voice steady with warmth, and to every moment that led us back here. The courtyard erupted in cheers, the clink of crystal greeting the bloom of summer roses. Photographers captured the embrace between Anton and Sergei, two friends whose journey from silence to reconciliation had become the true centerpiece of the celebration. As music drifted from a string quartet under a blossoming arbor, Anton stepped onto the dance floor at Sergei's invitation. Together, they swayed under lantern light and drifting petals. With each turn and step, they reaffirmed a bond that no argument could erase, no passing years could diminish. Around them, guests danced and celebrated. But for Anton and Sergei, the world narrowed to the space they shared, hearts in perfect harmony. When the sun dipped low and lanterns glowed like fireflies, Anton walked to the edge of the courtyard, watching his friend laugh with his new wife. He felt the weight of regret finally lift, replaced by quiet joy. The wedding invitation he had once declined was now the key that reopened the door to a friendship more precious than any jewel. And beneath the soft glow of dusk, Anton realized that this was not just the final chapter of their old story, but the first page of a new one, rich with promise, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bond of two hearts guided home.